So today we have John Eldredge, best-selling author, also director of Ransom Heart Ministries. And tons of books have been written in the last decade, including Wild at Heart for You. Really would love to just dive right in and, what is this thing that I feel like the church is kind of wrestling with? What is a man? What is the masculine journey? In your own words, if we're, as we're, sitting here talking to some 20-somethings, like, what is this thing called the masculine journey? How would you define it?
Right. The masculine journey is the process whereby God shapes boys into men, and whereby he shapes men into very good men. Men who can be entrusted with power and position, money, influence in this world, right? So it's a process. You don't get an oak tree overnight, right? It's wind and rain and years and seasons. There is a journey, and it's really fascinating because God has literally scripted a journey for men to take, to undergo, to push through, to experience, so that this formation can take place. Mm-hmm. We are very experiential learners, right? There's just only so much you can learn from a book or in a classroom. Men learn by doing, and there's something about the process of doing and pushing through a series of trials, lessons, setbacks, victories that shapes the internal life of men.
Right. And so, that being kind of the foundation, like, I'd love to hear, even in your own journey, I know my journey in my 20s was, it was all over the place, right? There was experiences where summers I'd work for the government, or I was involved with a ministry called Young Life, or I was doing multiple different things in my 20s,
right.
And all those things shaped me, and that's what it sounds like you're talking about. But like, even for you, like your 20s, like, how was God even a part of that process for you in making you a man?
Yeah. Masculine formation takes place in the context of men. And that was the design from the beginning of time, right? That the Father to the Son, and then kind of the company of men, the community of men, the fellowship of men to young men, whether it's uncles, right, or big brothers, grandfathers, would help shape the journey. Well, I didn't have that. My dad was an alcoholic, and by my 20s, he was gone, completely checked out, taken out of my story. And so my story is a pretty dramatic rescue of God stepping into a young man with a lot of passion and a lot of squirreliness, and some pretty rough edges that needed to be knocked off, but a fire, in the heart to change the world. And God began to take me through a series of experiences, part of that in the outdoors, through a love of backpacking and wilderness and fly fishing, through a process of work. Work is a really big theme in the 20s. Mm-hmm. And I actually was running a theater company in Los Angeles, and all of the joys and the pitfalls of that, and trials, and being entrusted with responsibility, and then love, and enter the young woman, right? So love usually shows up in the 20s, not always, but so engaged, right, at 23, and married, and in learning to love and learning how to live with a woman, and so you have all these lessons. You have money and responsibility, and you have the woman in your life, and then kind of a group of friends that we'd go out and rock climb in the desert, and the fellowship of men, learning to live in that, and learning to trust men, right? All of that was kind of the formation of my life in my 20s.
In your 20s, you have a little less to lose. Most of them don't have mortgages, or they're not married, or there's less financial strain or anything like that. So
it's huge.
It's kind of risk away.
The consequences of screwing it up in your 20s are at least smaller
Mm-hmm.
than the consequences in your 50s.
Sure.
So now's the time to make your mistakes, right? Now's the time to go for it.
Go out
Try
and
it.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
That's great. Part of the process, even with what we do with Training Ground, and any man in his 20s, and you had even shared about it in your story about a young man engaging his father, and then you having God bring other fathers to you.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on advice or just wisdom of how does a young man understand and interpret his relationship with his father in that process? Mm-hmm. It's a big question.
It was in my 20s that I was finally able to look at my relationship with my dad with some distance and some perspective,
Sure.
right? And see, frankly, some of his failures, but also see some of the good things, see where he was trying. But he kind of flew the thing into a wall. I mean, he really did. The alcohol and blew the family apart. And it was in my 20s that I actually learned to forgive my dad. Which was a really amazing process, both for him and for me.
Right.
And it began with honesty, right? Like, this is the decade of honesty. You don't have to pretend about things anymore. And you can be honest about what was it like with your dad.
Yeah.
Did you get these things from him? My dad didn't teach me anything about money. Nothing about women, except that he kept pornography in his workshop, right? He taught me nothing about career or passion, calling, and nothing about God. And like, I came in, I just felt like I was bankrupt. Yeah. I'm the guy that's dealt, the bad hand in life. And first there was a lot of anger about that. Sure. and resentment. And you know what? I had to face that. I had to work through that. And that's all okay. Like, that's all okay to look at that relationship honestly. It's not about blaming. It's not about accusation. It's not about like betraying family or betraying dad. It's just saying, look, I'm kind of in the process now of becoming a man myself. Right. And I need to sort out what I got from my dad, what I didn't get from my dad, and frankly, how I feel about all that.
Sure. And it's interesting. I feel like we have one of two experiences with the guys in Training Ground. One is this, where it's very defined of what we didn't get from our dads. And then there's the other side of the coin of not being able to, thinking our dad is still a hero, which he probably is. Right. But we don't take an honest look at our story. Yeah. And so we kind of want to live in not say a place of denial, but a place that we don't want to see our dad as human. We don't want to see, yes, he was great at this, but I missed out on this. And so, any thoughts on, that side of the coin, where it's like any encouragement to say, and I think some young men are just like, I don't want to think critically about my dad or throw my dad under the bus, and I don't think it's about that. I think it's taking an honest look at your own heart as a young man and being able to understand, it's kind of taking inventory of just figuring out what your journey's been like.
Right. The father-son relationship is the deepest and most influential relationship in the universe because of the Father and the Son of God, right? Like, that's literally the core of reality. Right. So your relationship with your dad has shaped you as a young man in more ways than you know. Right. And the sooner you can go ahead and look at some of that and be honest about what was good and what wasn't so good, right? The better for everybody concerned, right? The better for the relationship, actually, okay? Part of becoming a young man is no longer being a boy, right? And just being, a boy looks at the world pretty naively, right? And so to be honest, not cynical, not angry, not bitter, but just honest about your relationship with your dad, super important.
That's good.